Some movies earn their reputation over decades. Others get handed it by accident. Caddyshack did both, a comedy so loose and so completely alive that it outlasted every polished rival of its era. What most people don't realize is just how close the whole thing came to being something completely forgettable. The original vision was a coming-of-age story. Young caddies at a private country club, navigating class pressure and summer jobs, trying to earn their futures. The story drew directly from real life. The Murray brothers had worked as caddies at a club in Illinois, and their older brother had won a prestigious caddy scholarship, the same prize that drives the teenage storyline. The adult characters were always meant to be decoration. Colorful noise at the edges of a story that belonged to the kids. What happened instead is one of the great accidental transformations in comedy history. Getting the film made required a specific kind of leverage. The studio liked the concept but needed a recognizable name attached before committing. That name was Chevy Chase, whose recent box office track record turned the project from a question mark into something worth financing. With Chase confirmed, the search began for the character who would become the loud, tradition-smashing millionaire at the center of the story. Don Rickles was reportedly in the conversation. But the director caught Rodney Dangerfield on a late-night television appearance and his mind was made up immediately. That restless, self-undermining energy belonged on a golf course. There was one problem. Dangerfield had spent his entire career working live audiences. He knew how to read a room, feed off laughter, adjust in real time. On a film set, the crew goes completely silent during takes so the audio is usable. After his first few attempts, Dangerfield reportedly couldn't understand why nobody was responding. Someone had to sit him down and explain that laughter during filming destroys the recording. A man who had built 4 decades of connection with live crowds suddenly had to perform into complete silence. Meanwhile, 2 of the film's biggest names were carrying a history most audiences would never guess. Murray and Chase had reportedly come to actual blows backstage at Saturday Night Live just 2 years before filming. Chase had left the show at the peak of its fame to pursue Hollywood. Murray came in to replace him. There was already resentment on both sides, and when Chase returned as a guest host, it cracked open. Insults were exchanged, it went past words, and a mutual friend had to physically separate them before the broadcast could go on. 2 years later, they were on the same movie. The director quietly kept their characters' worlds separate in the script. Eventually he brought both men together over lunch, sketched out a concept, and they shot the shack scene that same afternoon. Watching it now, knowing what came before, is a genuinely strange experience. The production itself passed into legend for reasons unrelated to anything on screen. Filming took place in the fall of 1979 at a Florida golf course, and by multiple accounts the set operated less like a professional film shoot and more like a 6-week event that occasionally stopped to make a movie. One of the film's key writers was living inside the excess rather than observing it. He died just months after the film was released. The chaos that shaped the movie had a human cost that never made it into any frame. Then Hurricane David arrived, shut everything down, and forced the cast and crew into a nearby hotel. In what is perhaps the least surprising decision in the film's history, they responded to the forced downtime by throwing a large party. When the storm passed, they were behind schedule and running on fumes. Carl Spackler was never supposed to be a major character. Murray was hired for roughly a week of background work, then back to Saturday Night Live. That plan lasted until the cameras rolled. Murray brought something to the character that nobody had written and nobody could contain. Every scene he touched came back larger and stranger than the script described. The production kept calling him back from New York. A supporting role quietly became the movie's most enduring presence. The most famous speech in the film, about caddying for a spiritual leader in Tibet and receiving total consciousness as the only tip, almost belonged to someone else entirely. Another actor attempted it first. It landed completely flat. Too sincere, not absurd enough. The director handed it to Murray, who kept the basic premise and built everything else from scratch through pure improvisation. A man utterly convinced he'd gotten the better end of the deal, and who has never once questioned that conclusion since. The gopher was almost nothing. In the original script it appeared in a single scene, a background pest. After filming Wrapped, the producers reviewed the assembled cut and recognized it lacked a clear center. The answer was already on screen. That single-scene rodent was transformed into Carl's recurring nemesis, rebuilt with help from effects specialists connected to the team behind Star Wars. The puppet cost a few $1,000s. By the time all the new sequences and effects work were complete, the total investment had climbed to around $500,000. The same technical lineage that built lightsabers was now animating a smirking golf course gopher. Ted Knight arrived on set with a background built on precise timing and structured television work. Nothing prepared him for what he walked into. Dangerfield was firing lines at nightclub pace. Murray was reinventing every scene. Chase made spontaneity look like the only sensible approach. Knight reportedly stood holding his script while the chaos moved around him, but he never broke. He committed completely to his pompous, easily wounded judge every single time. Without someone playing it completely straight, none of the surrounding chaos would have had anywhere to land. The finale created a problem nobody anticipated. The golf course sat directly under the flight path of a major airport. When the effects team detonated the closing explosion, they launched a fireball into the open sky beneath the approach path of commercial aircraft. A pilot spotted it and radioed in, reporting what looked like a crash on the ground. Authorities were notified. For a brief, very real window of time, people with no connection to the production believed a disaster had occurred. Bill Murray's brother had been stationed on the course with one job: watch the sky, and alert the director when a plane was approaching. On a production that had already survived a hurricane and a backstage fistfight, a man standing in a Florida field staring at clouds fits the story perfectly. When the film opened, critics called it unfocused and wandering. One prominent reviewer gave it 2 stars. Looking at what the production had actually gone through, that response wasn't entirely wrong. The movie was assembled from pieces, rescripted on the fly, and held together by a gopher nobody had originally planned to use. But audiences didn't come looking for a tightly built story. Home video and cable television gave the film what its opening weekend couldn't: time. People came back. They absorbed the lines until they were part of how they talked to their friends. Years later it earned a place on the American Film Institute's list of the funniest American movies ever made. The most remarkable fact about Caddyshack is this: the film that people have been quoting for over 40 years barely had a script. 3 writers spent 3 months building a 200-page screenplay. Not once in those 200 pages did Carl Spackler appear by name. Then 3 comedians walked onto a Florida golf course and rewrote the movie in real time. Most of what they invented stayed. A director who knew when to step back. A camera pointed at people who couldn't stop creating. And a film that had absolutely no business working the way it did.